There's a famous quote by Robert Evans. There are three sides to a story: yours, mine, and the truth. In my line of work, you come to realize that the truth is rarely an objective perspective. For example, a bloody fight is the result of an argument. One side claims self-defense, the other claims a brutal attack. A camera shows a man striking another in the heat of the moment. Case closed, right? Truth is stored in that digital medium. No. When you look further, what do you find? A lifelong friendship, betrayal, months of tension, threats, and a boil-over. Maybe the attacker truly believed his life was in danger and mistook the slightest movement as the beginning of a punch. Perhaps he just let his anger at the situation get the best of him. Maybe it's a mix of both. What's the objective truth here? And for whom is that truth valid? When you're a cop, understanding these nuances in truth is critical. And understanding the power those nuances can have is even more important. Not only when we have to discern whether or not someone's recollection of events is accurate, but when we lie to achieve a specific response. It's all something you become very familiar with. For me, in my investigations in particular, this was especially true. Since my investigation of who I've dubbed as the Watcher, I had been assigned to numerous cases. Many were either uneventful or too out of our control to do much more than make an unofficial official report. However, during this time, Officer Ryan somehow managed to get into the chief's good graces while I was bouncing between the real crimes and looking at unusual occurrences. He, in turn, earned the opportunity to tag along on some of my investigations. In one instance, we even took a trip to what is easily the creepiest amusement park I've ever visited. I believe the name was Cheesy's World. Honestly, we could only spend about 10 minutes there before mutually deciding to nope out and tell the chief that everything was on the up and up. I'm not sure if Cheesy's is even still around, but either way, I'm not really the guy to tell the story place. The point being, Officer Ryan and I had spent what was becoming a considerable amount of time together, and admittedly, the guy was starting to grow on me. Because of that relationship, I asked for him personally on my next case. Local hospital had called about a man trespassing on the mental health ward. Supposedly, someone had been spotted inside the ward multiple times. One account from a patient even suggested that the man had been sitting on the ceiling. At first, these accounts weren't taken too seriously. But when one of the security guards spotted a naked man scale a wall and climb into a small vent in the ceiling, we got called. Typically, patrol officers respond to these types of calls. However, when information on the stranger accounts of this man made its way up the chain of command, I was called in. From an inhumanely loud scream to seemingly materializing into locked rooms, my interest was immediately piqued, along with my disgust. When Officer Ryan and I pulled up to the hospital, things were already in motion. Explanations for why we needed to evacuate the floor and bring in multiple officers were already given. And on our arrival, we were escorted down a set of hallways that led to the mental health ward. The security guard escorting us referred to it as the old hospital. Apparently, it used to be a primary set of buildings. As the hospital decided to modernize and expand, they built a new set of buildings on top of the old. This was good for the hospital in general, but it left the older portion noticeably neglected. The first signs of this were apparent in the rickety elevator we took down to the mental health facility's main lobby. Admittedly, it was a little uncomfortable going down an elevator that likely hadn't been serviced in who knows how long. The creaks and moans of the rusty lift only added to my growing paranoia. Officer Ryan made small talk with the guard as we descended. The guard mentioned how the hospital was storing an overflow of oxygen tank cylinders in the old hospital's storage room. He usually made the rounds to make sure the tanks weren't compromised. During one of his rounds, he claimed to have seen who he referred to as the Hermit eating a dead mouse. The story made my stomach churn a bit, but listening to the guard take comfort in Officer Ryan took my mind off the stress for a moment. I always thought it was fascinating how that guy seemed to be beloved by everyone. But when the doors opened back up to reveal a lobby that looked as though it hadn't been changed since the 60s, my stress level spiked way back up. Waiting patiently was Detective Evelyn Joss. Behind her were the two officers that I usually saw accompanying the chief. Detective Joss's light brown hair was tied up into a bun. Her navy blue attire and dark makeup contrasted with her fair skin and soft freckles across her nose. And of course, she was scowling. "Took you long enough to get here, Smith," she said with a very detectable level of frustration. "We've already cleared the floor because of the dangerous individual. I'm hoping that you won't make me do the rest of your job and actually assist in catching him." "We can't all be track stars, Detective Joss," I joked. "Plus, we seem to have made it before the heat death of the universe, so by my account, we still have plenty of time to figure this out. You're welcome." She rolled her eyes and turned her attention towards Officer Ryan. "Hey, Barry. How are you? Did you manage to find a new place for you and your wife?" Officer Ryan nodded. "Actually, we did. This new set of houses just finished getting developed about 6 miles north of here. We're thinking about moving in there." "Wait, Barry?" I interjected. "How didn't I know? Since when the hell were you two close?" He shrugged. "We just talk sometimes, I guess. She's cool, man." I looked back at Detective Joss with an eyebrow raised and saw a half smile was being sent back in my direction. She then turned to the security guard and said, "Thanks for bringing them down here, Davis. We'll take it from here. If you want to have the guys waiting outside the elevator upstairs, that'd be fine. But we don't want you guys interfering with anything down here." With a nod, he made his way back to the elevator and gave a simple wave as the doors closed in front of him. "Wait, you want them waiting upstairs?" I asked. "How the hell are we going to get this guy out of here without them noticing?" Detective Joss motioned for us to follow her. Without a word, she led us down a dark hallway that ended with a door that had a busted exit sign hanging over it. "It leads to the back of the hospital. I'm thinking we could corral him through here so that the rest of the staff doesn't see him. And then—" "Wait," I said skeptically. "The hospital is less than a mile away from a major highway, and you want to just send him outside?" She exhaled sharply before continuing. "No. Assuming we can't kill it, we have a couple guys with trucks waiting in the back. Hopefully, we can catch him and move him out of the city and into the woods, somewhere to let him run off. We won't have much time, though. Apparently, the chief has seen this guy before, and he's somewhat of an escape artist. Best we can hope for is out of sight, out of mind." "Out of sight, out of mind," I scoffed. "Glad we're really looking out for the people." She shrugged. "Yeah, well, I'd love to do more, too, but we're not monster fighters, I know. Still just feels empty." Detective Joss went on to explain how the Hermit has a tendency to fill any enclosed space. When exposed to the outside, he'd likely dive right for the back of the empty truck. From there, she gave us a tour of the old hospital. There wasn't much to see. Everything was confined to a small floor. We started with the main reception and living area. To its right was a sliding glass door leading to the terrace. Straight ahead, 3 hallways. The hallway furthest to the left led down to patient rooms behind a locked door. The hallway in the middle contained the security station and a few more unseparated rooms further down. The last hallway was the most interesting. At first glance, all you could see is a few locked doors that you could simply pass off as simple janitorial closets and water fountain. Thinking back on the conversation I overheard Officer Ryan having with a security guard, the door at the end of the hallway provided the most intrigue. Inside, I found a number of oxygen tanks stacked on top of each other, with other miscellaneous items surrounding them. While oxygen itself is inflammable for those that don't know, it can be extremely dangerous near flammable material. Not to get too much into the science, but as an oxidizer, it could cause an existing fire to spread much faster. Not to mention the fact that one pressurized tank exploding due to rupture could cause some damage. 10 to 20 of them could be catastrophic. Feel free to correct me on the science, but either way, this certainly didn't jive with OSHA standards. Not only that, but there seemed to be a small hole in the ceiling. Point of entrance, perhaps? I snapped a couple photos on my phone. I informed Officer Ryan and Detective Joss about my discovery, but they both largely brushed me off. "All right, Detective Joss began. "Barry, I want you to be at the—" Before she could finish, a voice that I assumed belonged to one of the officers assigned to watch over us came through her radio. Supposedly, he had heard a loud noise coming from the terrace, and when he went to go investigate, he saw someone sitting outside. We dashed for the main hall and found the same officer standing at the terrace door. But all I could focus on was the figure sitting in the fetal position outside. Though he had a large frame, he was skinny, with a distended stomach. His head was probably twice as large as an average human head, but most of that seemed to be from his massive, forward-hanging brow. His scowl accentuated deep wrinkles, and thin, stringy black hairs fell over beady eyes that were aimed at us with a deep-seated hatred. Yet, despite the disturbing look, he seemed to be otherwise human. It was hard not to wonder what this whole song and dance was for. Yes, trespassing is a crime, but evacuating an entire wing of the hospital and bringing us in here for one human man? It was odd. This could have easily been handled by a couple of patrol officers. I could tell Officer Ryan was feeling the same way, but Detective Joss was on edge. When she finally came over to talk, I almost laughed in her face. "This is the guy, huh?" I said with a smirk. "Probably homeless. Man obviously needs help, but we brought out all of this just for him." She wasn't having it. "Do not underestimate this man, Smith. I want you both sharp when we approach. That means be prepared to fire at a moment's notice." I scoffed. "Are you serious? I've seen a lot of fucked up shit as of late. I understand when there's a threat, but I'm not going to assume crazy until I see crazy. Do you know how bad it'd look if we came at an obviously unarmed human man with guns drawn for the heinous crime of sitting? Can you imagine if one of us accidentally shot the guy?" "Yeah," Officer Ryan followed. "You guys haven't technically seen him do anything wild, right? No reports of threats or him actually assaulting anyone? Sure, the trespassing is bad, but he is just sitting there. If he went to the media about 3 cops pulling guns on him without real provocation, it's gonna look bad." She shook her head. "Look, I've done this enough to know. I understand where you're coming from, but I'm telling you, that split-second difference between unholstering your weapon and firing could be the difference between life and death. If he turns out to be just a guy, then who's gonna believe— No!" I nearly shouted. "That's absolutely not the standard we set. We are, or at least we should be, better than that. I've heard the stories too, but we can't make assumptions like that until we have the facts." Everyone went silent for a moment. The tension in the air between Detective Joss and me was palpable. In his usual fashion, Officer Ryan attempted to ease the situation. "So, 2 beats 1? My math is usually pretty bad, but I'm pretty sure we win, so... Yay? No guns." "Fine," Detective Joss said through clenched teeth before calling over the officer she was speaking with earlier. "Murray, take a position where our friend can't see you. If anything happens, then you shoot to fucking kill." We could at least agree to that. I took point on the approach with my hand over my taser. Officer Ryan did the same to my right, while Detective Joss stood at my left with her hand hovering near her gun. When we opened the terrace door, there was a tangible feeling that we weren't wanted. The man didn't move a muscle or say a word, but it was as if his very presence was telling us to leave. Admittedly, I got a little choked up in trying to speak with him. Unfortunately, Officer Ryan didn't pick up on the hostile atmosphere and made the mistake of being the first to communicate. "Hey man, we got a call about you being here, and the hospital staff informed us that they'd like you to leave the premises. If you need us to get you some clothes or take you somewhere, we'd love to—" "No!" The Hermit's gravelly voice left us stunned for a moment. The sound seemed to boom, but it appeared as though he was barely putting any force behind his words. I looked over to Detective Joss for a moment and found myself mimicking her, my hand now firmly placed over my gun. I was slowly becoming aware that maybe this guy really wasn't human, and that I had made a grave mistake insisting that we come at him without guns. It took Officer Ryan a moment to regain his composure. He let out a nervous laugh and tried continuing. Sorry. Look, we can't really take no for an answer here. If the hospital staff wants you gone, then you gotta go. We'd really prefer it if you worked with us to make it easy. No! His voice boomed again. This is my fucking home!